Greetings YouTube, Kudou-kun here. For those who don't know what's going on, what we're going to do today is look at a list of cards for the color blue in the MLP card game that'll help you get started in building a deck, or if you already have a blue deck, it'll help you get it more situated to today's metagame. We'll be looking at 5 mains, 10 friends, 10 events, and 10 resources that I think are viable or interesting for today's metagame. Couple of disclaimers before we go. I don't play at high-level tournaments or high-level events, so there is a possibility that by the time you see this, the current metagame will cancel out some of the choices that I've made for this list. If you do happen to be somebody who goes to events or tournaments or plays in a competitive setting, then please leave me your thoughts on cards in the comments section below. The more information we can get out there, the better. Second disclaimer we'll put is keep in mind there are a lot of cards and I'm limiting it to 10 from each set except for mains, which is 5. So if you see a card that you like that's not on this list, it's just because I didn't have space for it, but feel free to talk about it in the comments. With all that out of the way, let's take a look at mains. The first main we'll be looking at is Rainbow Dash, Ambassador of Loyalty. At the start of a face-off involving this card, turn it over. This is great because it can be any kind of face-off, so if you happen to go into a Troublemaker face-off, or if you happen to go into like a Showdown face-off or something, you can flip this over, and it doesn't even matter which player started the face-off. And in its boosted side, it has competitive 2, so while in the face-off it gets +2 power, so it goes from being a 1 power pony to a 5 power pony for no cost. It's just has to be involved in the face-off, and during the main phase you can exhaust it to move it. For like 90% of the game, this is 5 power that you can move for free. Yeah, some people will point out that it sucks that you exhaust it to move it, but you can choose to just pay 2 to move it normally. I mean, it's 5 power. 2 to move 5 power is not bad at all. Yeah, it only gets the power when it's in a face-off, but it happens during all face-offs, and the only other time that it's going to matter is if you are at a problem trying to solve it, and if you're already solving the problem, then, you know, it doesn't really matter that it doesn't get the power during solving the problem. The other Rainbow Dash we're going to be looking at is Flyer Extraordinaire. This is another example of the mains from the very first set still being really good today. If you confront this card's problem while you own a Troublemaker at that problem, turn this card over, this is fantastic. It's so good. If you're building a deck around having Troublemakers in play, then this card is just amazing. Very easy flip condition, and when it's flipped over, it's 3 power and has Swift. So you can pay 1 to move 3 power around the board, which is all nice on its own, but you also get the effect that if you move it somewhere from home, you can pay another action point to move another pony there too. So it's like if you're paying the 2 for normal movement, you're almost getting another movement for free. Or you could pay just the 1 to move Rainbow Dash. Really good. Another thing that's cool about getting to move another one of your friends from home to a problem, and you'll be seeing this a lot in blue, is it's not affected by the white cards that make you pay extra to move a character. Blue is all about free movement, so it's going to be getting around a lot of what white has to offer. So if you're worried about white at all, blue is definitely the color you should be looking at. Next we'll be looking at Princess Luna and Nightmare Moon, starting with Nightmare Moon. Mistress of the Night is pretty okay. When you confront this card's problem, you flip it over, so very easy flip condition, and when you confront this card's problem, you can pay 2 to frighten an opponent's friend there. Frighten is one of the first decks that I really experimented with. I still, to this day, think Frighten is a really cool concept because it just takes so much from your opponent. This is probably the best main you'd want to run if you're doing a Frighten deck. My only problem with it is paying 2 to frighten a friend is actually kind of a lot, considering it costs 2 for your opponent to unfrighten. If this effect costed 1, then this would be the premier blue main, because it's just such a great effect. You lose 1 point, your opponent loses 2 points, but for this case, I just don't know. It is still a really good main, but because the cost is at 2 instead of 1, there are arguments for running different mains, even if you are running a Frighten deck. But I still think this is a very decent choice if you're running a Frighten deck. The Princess Luna we're going to look at is Dream Warrior. When you play a friend to this card's problem, you can turn it over, so very, very easy flip condition. That's another thing that blues seem to have in common, is just super simple flip conditions, like not even conditions really. And when you play a friend to a problem, you can move this card to that problem, so it's completely free movement. which is great. And because it goes off of playing cards from the hand, this is a great counter main to white decks, which don't do very much to playing cards from the hand, and to pink decks, which will be discarding all of your in-play characters, so being able to get an effect off of playing characters from the hand is pretty glorious. Last card we'll be looking at is Shining Armor and Princess Cadence, the fastball special. This is a very interesting main, probably one of the more interesting mains in the whole game. At the start of a problem face-off, you could pay 1 to put a wind-up counter on this card, and then if you do, you can choose to turn this card over, or you can choose to just keep it and keep getting wind-up counters. When you do decide to flip this card over, not only do you get to move this to a problem, but you can remove all the wind-up counters from this to move that many friends to this card's problem. Keep in mind, it doesn't specify that the friends have to be from here, so if they happen to be at home or the other problem, you can move them over just fine, and it's just piling a bunch of your friends into a face-off, and it's pretty great. Probably the coolest thing about this is you don't really even need to save up counters. Honestly, at the start of a problem face-off, just paying 1 to put a wind-up counter on this and then immediately flipping it over, moving 3 power over there, and then moving another friend over there for free is just good on its own. Like, you could just almost immediately flip this, or you could choose to do it late game and just absolutely swarm into a face-off. Very good, very viable card. Getting into friends, I just want to get this card out of the way because this is one of the cards that I've complained about the most in all of my MLP CCG career. Rainbow Dash on even ground. At the start of each player's turn, that player loses all action tokens that weren't gained this turn. So that means every single turn you and your opponent start with a clean slate. There's no more saving up action points. I'll get my hate for this card out of the way. I feel like this breaks a very important part of the game. One of the most key factors in playing this game, and the thing that separates a newer player from a skilled player, is choosing the timing for which you play. There is a lot of passing your turn without actually using any of your action points during the MLP card game, especially at the beginning of the game. People will go 3, 4, 5 turns without spending a single action point sometimes because it's all about exploding and doing a lot during one turn. And I feel like Rainbow Dash on even ground breaks that flow by making it impossible to play that way. There's no explosive plays in MLP when you play this card on the field. It's just very minimal plays, little increments at a time, which completely kills control decks. But that's it. Whether you agree with me or disagree with me, that's my main problem with the card. I feel like it breaks an important part of the game, and I feel like it makes control decks, like a huge archetype of the game, very unplayable. That being said, it does obviously have the downside of you lose your action points too, so if you play this card, you have to have very low costing cards in your deck. But if you build a deck around this, like, this is pretty much the best anti-meta you can get. You build a deck around this with either yellow or possibly pink as your side, and you can just absolutely destroy the field, and it's great. I would say that this card is absolutely necessary to at least one in every single blue deck, and there's no exception to that. You have to have at least one because you're always going to come across decks that need those action points and make those explosive plays. I would say that you can very easily build this deck and have 3 in, but I'd say that at least one is very necessary, and they should be pretty easy to get a hold of. Well, after talking about my least favorite Rainbow Dash, we're going to talk about my most favorite Rainbow Dash. Goosebump Giver is the reason that Frighten is a thing. So after an opponent's friend is frightened, you can exhaust this card to frighten another friend. This is so good because there's situational Frighten cards where it's like you can only frighten a friend at a problem, or you can only frighten a friend with 2 or less power, just different things like that. And this doubles their potency and lets you choose any target you want to. So if you play a card that says, like, you can frighten a friend with 2 or less power, okay? You do that, you frighten the friend with 2 or less power, and then you use Goosebump Giver to frighten a friend that has, like, 5 power, and you get double the value. It's so good. Everything about Goosebump Giver is amazing. The other cool thing is it procs off of itself, so if you have 3 Goosebump Givers in play, and you play 1 Frighten card to frighten 1 friend, you just exhaust all 3 of them to just frighten 3 more friends, and it can add up really quickly. The fact that you only have to exhaust to use its effect means you can do it every single turn. Everything about this card is amazing. 3 in every Frighten deck for sure, probably 0 in every deck that doesn't use Frighten. Speaking of Frighten, holy crap, this card is absolutely amazing. First of all, it has a chaos effect. When this card is flipped, you can pay any number of action tokens to frighten a friend for each action token you paid in this way. Broken. It is absolutely amazing. And here's why. Chaos, right? You flip it during a face-off. If you flip this during a face-off and you have some action points left over, then you can pretty much just pay one action token to take friends out of the face-off. And it's so good. Everything about it is amazing. Like, if you have enough action points, you can just take your opponent's entire side of the field just out of the game by frightening all of them and making them useless in the face-off. And your opponent can't do anything about it because you can't unfrighten friends during the face-off. That's something you can only do during your main phase. Its other effect is, it's okay. It's an immediate, you can pay 1 to move this card to a Frighten Friend's problem. So if you frighten a friend, you can pay 1 to move this card over as if it had Swift, and that's good. Because it's not choosing to move, it's paying 1 and then the move happens. It's not caught off by like Shoei from White or Octavia or anything like that. So, you know, that's pretty awesome. Just paying 1 to move this to a Frightened Friends problem can be really awesome, and I'd say that it's probably good at 1 or 2 in most Frightened decks. Also, can we talk about paying 3 for 4 power? Because that's where it's at. Rainbow Dash Winged Wonder was one of the first ultra rares that everybody just had to get their hands on, and to this day, it's still good. Pay 3, put this on a problem, and when you play this card to a problem, you can move up to 3 of your friends to that problem for free. For free. It's straight out, gives a cost of free, and not like Shoei just doesn't touch it. And it's great. You're paying 3 to move 3 of your friends already on the board, plus adding 2 more power to it, and this card has Swift, so you're paying 1 to move 2 power around, which these days isn't that good. Swift, even on 2 powers, not really that good at all, but just the ability to put 2 power on a problem and also move 3 other friends to the problem is still good to this day. Half of these cards were Rainbow Dash cards. I can't even believe it. This is the last one, though, I promise. This has competitive 3, which is great. As we know, that means this is a 6 during face-offs. Just amazing. And then during a face-off, you can pay 1 to give this card plus 2 power till the end of the face-off. Do I even need to explain to you why this card is good? It should be pretty obvious. 3 for 3 power, that's good. Becomes a 6 during face-offs, so 3 for 6 power, holy cow, that is a lot of power. During a face-off, as an immediate, you can pay 1 to give this card plus 2 power. Do you have any idea what that means? That means if your opponent plays a card that gives them more power than you, if your opponent flips a card with higher power than yours, regardless of when and what your opponent does, your opponent cannot beat you in a face-off if you have enough action points. And considering how powerful this card already is, that's so good. Everything about it is amazing. If you can get your hands on this card, it's pretty much a must-have in every deck, except for a deck that's using Uneven Ground. You know what, I take it back. Even on a deck that's using Uneven Ground, you could probably fit 1 or 2 of these in. Weathermare is one of the more controversial 1-drops. I kind of like her. She has Swift, and she can go in a lot of decks that are splashing blue. And if you move her, then there's a 50% chance of either putting a +1 counter on her or frightening her. My one problem with this is when you frighten her, she loses all her +1/+1 counters, so that's awful. But if you happen to pull the move off and she gets the +1 counter, then she's 2 power for 1 that you're moving around with Swift, so that's pretty awesome. Plus, keep in mind every counter you put on her makes it easier for you to meet blue requirements, so she's not a very vital card, but she is a card that you should consider splashing if you are using blue in another deck. Anybody who's seen my old videos knows I'm all about that Holly Dash. Holly Dash is one of the best cards in all of blue. When you move this card to a problem, you may move another one of your characters to the same problem for free. That is really ridiculous because it procs off of movement effects. If you play an event card that says move a friend to a problem, then you can move Holly Dash, proc her effect, move another card, and you're getting 2 for the price of 1, and she's already at 4 power. Even if you don't have a card to like move her and proc her effect, pay 2, move 4 power to a problem, get even more power on top of that for free. And people have seen this in my other videos before, but you can do these really, really ridiculous things where it's like, pay 2, move Holly Dash, move another Holly Dash for free, move another Holly Dash for free, move a Spitfire for free, move a Spitfire for free, move a Spitfire. It gets really dumb because of these movement effects proccing off of each other. Holly Dash must have in every blue deck at least 2. I would argue 3 in most decks, but you can get away with 2 these days in a lot of decks. The effect is just way too good. Changeling Drones! Changeling Drones are so awesome! This card has +2 power for each Frightened Friend in play. In everybody's, okay? Everybody's at every problem in both homes. This gets +2 power. It already comes in play 2 for 2 power, so you're not losing anything off of this ever. And if you're playing for a deck that does nothing but Frighten, this card gets so monstrously big. Like, even if your opponent only has 1 Frightened Friend, just 1, this is 4 power. If your opponent has 2 Frightened Friend, this is 2 for 6 power. It gets so big, and your opponent has to unfrighten their friends. And they have to do something about this, because if your opponent just leaves their friends frightened and just starts playing more cards from their hand or something, then this Changeling Drone gets so big they can't deal with it, especially if you can get 2 of these in play. Because that means every Frightened Friend that they have gives you 4 power on your side of the board, and that can get out of hand too. 1 Frightened Friend, 4 power, 2 Frightened Friends, 8 power. They get very big, they're easy to get a hold of these days, 3 in every single Frightened deck. Crystal Guard is another card that lets you frighten friends. He's not as potent as he used to be, but I still think he's good enough that you should at least look into him. When you move this card to a problem, you can exhaust this and pay 1 to frighten an opponent's friend. This does get a little bit costly, but still you're only paying 1 to frighten, and that's really good. 1 to frighten, so your opponent has to pay 2 to unfrighten. You can get a huge lead on your opponent in action points with something like this. It's way better than, like, Nightmare Moon, for example. And it's an effect that can happen multiple times. So you move it to a problem, and then later in the game you can move it to a problem and get its effect off again. Later in the game you can move to a problem, get its effect off again, and it can just keep happening for that 1 action point, which is really cool. Plus, it procs off of movement effects again, so if you have a Holly Dash, you move Holly Dash, you have a Crystal Guard for free, you pay the 1, you frighten a friend, and let's add it up, okay? You paid 2 to move Holly Dash, and then you moved Crystal Guard, and then you paid 1 to use Crystal Guard's effect. You paid 3 action points to move 7 power to a problem on top of frightening a friend. It's just insane. The last friend we'll be looking at is actually a Spike card, which is interesting. So Spike Dream Big is 4 for 4 power. It has Swift, so you only pay 1 to move that 4 power around, and as an immediate effect, you can pay 1 to give this card +2 power until the end of the turn. Some of my more eagle-eyed viewers will be like, whoa, 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 Kudou, isn't that just Rainbow Dash, best of the best? Well, yes, but hold on a second. First of all, this is natural 4 power, so that's pretty cool. You do lose the competitive thing, so and you can pay 1 to get this card +2 power until the end of the turn. The one thing that's kind of cool about that is you can use it for solving problems. So if you happen to be like on an opponent's problem, you can pay the 1 to give this +2 power to the end of the turn. You can use it during your opponent's turn in case you need it for that reason at all. And yeah, I really think Spike Dream Big is a pretty decent card, even if it gets outshone by Best of the Best a little bit. This is still a really good card. The one really big stipulation I'd say is this is probably a better card than Best of the Best if you are splashing blue into another color, because its color requirements are lower and you don't have to put as much into it. It's already 4 power, so it pretty much meets all the color requirements of any problem you're playing in the deck. So yeah, it's probably not as good as Best of the Best, but if you can't get any Best of the Bests, or if you are splashing blue into another color, then Spike Dream Big is very viable. We're getting into events next. Call in the Dream Cavalry gives all of your characters Swift. That can be pretty darn awesome. The main reason that I want to look at this card is because it costs 0. Nothing. Nada. It is a free card you can play to give all your characters Swift. One thing that I will like to point out is if you are using a blue-purple Princess Luna deck, this card is awesome because it pretty much gives you free apparition tokens, are they called? I don't remember, but the free tokens that Princess Luna makes, you can totally get all of them off of this. It's great. And Swift isn't too bad too. Pay 1 to move all of your characters, paying 1 to move a Holly Dash, that sounds pretty awesome to me. I don't know about you guys. Epic Win, a must-have in most blue decks. At the start of your Troublemaker phase, defeat an opponent's Troublemaker. You don't have to have friends there, you don't have to have your main character there. Just defeat an opponent's Troublemaker. That is so important and good. I'm not even going to explain it to you guys, okay? Just straight out defeating an opponent's Troublemaker with absolutely no downside, side effects, or requirements is good. Faint of Heart gives our Frightened some kick. You can dismiss a Frightened friend. You're not always going to want to do this because part of Frightened is you kind of want to play around with your opponent and make them want to keep paying the action points to keep a character alive. And if you're just dismissing the friend, then you're kind of taking that away from your opponent, and it costs you more in the long run. But there are some friends that you know your opponent's going to want to keep alive and are causing you problems, so you can frighten a friend and then just immediately dismiss it if you have to. This is a great card to use in conjunction with Goosebump Giver, because you can frighten a non-important friend that you're not really trying to target. Use Goosebump Giver to target something really important, and then pay 1 with Faint of Heart to just get rid of it. Biff Pow is a showdown card, oddly enough. You can challenge an opponent's Troublemaker with one of your characters. The reason we're looking at this is because it's free. Like, obviously we have things like Epic Win, which costs 3, but this is completely 0. You just challenge an opponent's Troublemaker with one of your characters. There's a couple of things that's really cool about this. One, it doesn't say a friend or character at that problem, so you can do it with a character that happens to be at home or something, or at the other problem. And 2, it says character, so you can challenge it with your main character if you want to. One of the awesome things about this being that we have that Rainbow Dash with competitive 2 that becomes a 5. For 0 action points, that's pretty sweet. Nice Moves Kid is an often overlooked hand fixer card. Draw a card for each action token your opponent has, then discard the same number of cards. It's not the best card. It's not going to be in every deck, but it is a very nice consistency card if you are running a combo-heavy deck. Because if you're trying to pull off a specific combo and you let your opponent build up action points, then you can pretty much pay 1 to draw a bunch of cards from your deck and then handpick the cards you need specifically for your combo without having to pay too much. Most of the time you're going to be getting 3 to 5 off of that, paying 1 to draw into 3 or 5, and then the only downside being that you have to discard the cards that you know you're not going to use is pretty good. So yeah, if you're using something very combo heavy like the Uza-sized deck, for example, or if you're using an on even ground deck, then I recommend throwing in 1 or 2 Nice Moves Kid because it'll help you get your combo off more consistently. Spooky Scary Story has one of the weirdest artworks I've ever seen. But it's also a chaotic event, so when you flip this card, you can frighten a friend at home. That is going to be pretty worthless most of the time, and the other thing that kind of sucks about it is it says when this card is flipped, frighten a friend at home. It is not optional. If you have a friend at home and your opponent doesn't, you have to frighten your friend, and then you can play it during the main phase to frighten up to 2 friends at home. This is a very good card after a face-off because everybody gets sent home, especially if your opponent's the one that instigated the face-off, which, to be honest, you're playing blue, that's not going to happen a whole lot, but it will sometimes, and when it does, you're going to love this card because it's 2 to frighten 2 friends, you're paying 1 for each frighten, your opponent will have to pay 4 in order to unfrighten their field. Just getting that gap between you and your opponent's action points just even higher. Plus, on top of this, you can play the card that lets you frighten. What was it called? Faint of Heart. I remember. You can play Faint of Heart right off of this, and that's 3 action points to have a dismissed friend and a frightened friend. You can use Goosebump Giver off of this. 2 to frighten 2 is good. Gotta Go Fast is one of my favorite movement cards. Pay 1, move a character to a problem, and it happens during the face-off. This is a very good gotcha card. I don't know why they didn't put gotcha on there because it would have been perfect. but if your opponent is doing a face-off with you, if they play a showdown card or something, and you're caught off guard, then this gets you one of your friends into the problem. And of course, I'm not even going to go the whole Holly Dash thing, okay? You move Holly Dash, you get a whole bunch of other movement off of it for free. The other thing that's cool about this is it says face-off, so you can do it during Troublemaker face-offs, you can do it during Showdown face-offs, you can do it during all kinds of face-offs. The hard way is pretty much Biff Pow, but it has to be characters at a problem. The good thing about it over Biff Pow, though, is it's all of your friends at a problem. Characters even, so your main character's involved too. Challenge an opponent's Troublemaker with all your characters at its problem. That's just good. It's better than Biff Pow, but Biff Pow is free, so you can kind of do the math there. If you're using competitive, then Biff Pow might be better, but in every other scenario, the hard way is better than Biff Pow, and I'd even argue that it's probably a lot better than Epic Win, because it's, you know, 1/3 the cost. I'd probably still throw an Epic Win into my blue decks, but this is a really good card to throw in with it because it lets you get rid of a lot of problematic cards during a non-troublemaker phase, so that's awesome. Unending Nightmare, one of the funniest cards in the game. After a friend becomes unfrightened, frighten that friend. So you're getting even more value off of Frightened. If your opponent really needs a character and they're like, okay, I pay 2 to unfrighten, you pay 1, and they have to pay that 2 over again or they don't get the character. I've said this before and I'll say it again. Every player that plays at a high level counts exactly how many action points they'll need to pull their turn off during a turn. They're like, okay, I know I have 5 action points, I'm going to pay 2 for this, 1 for this, 2 for this, and they know they're going to do that. So if you can just throw this one little wrench in their gears where they have to pay 2 for something else, they have to start deciding what's more important to them, what they're going to be able to pull off this turn, how many more turns it's going to take to make up for it. It's just good. Every time you can throw your opponent off with something like this, it's a good thing. The last card we'll be looking at is Oh Yeah, and it is another Frighten card. If you win a problem face-off, has to be problem face-off by at least 5 power, Frighten an opposing friend, and the cool thing about it is it's an immediate. So because it's an immediate, you can use it when you know for sure you're going to win a face-off, and that's really cool. The other cool thing about it is if you do this off of a best of the best rainbow dash or something that like lets you get as much power as you want to, you can pay enough action points to guarantee you're going to get it off. I don't know if this is necessarily always a good thing, because if you do happen to have like a tie between your team and your opponent's team and you have to pay that extra 3 to get the 5 extra power, then you're pretty much playing 3 to frighten a friend, which isn't that good. But if you already are winning the face-off, then Oh Yeah is free Frighten. It's not even 1 to frighten, it's just free Frighten all around. And finally, we get to the resources. So we're going to start with Bag of Leaflets, which is pretty super in my opinion. You play it on a friend and you can exhaust this card to move one of your characters to that card's area. So not only is it swift, but it's better than swift, because you can play this on a character for 1, exhaust it immediately to move a character to that friend's problem, and next turn you can just keep doing it if you want to. Like every turn that this is on a friend, you get a free move that turn. That is amazing. And Holly Dash, 2, 3, 4, move Holly Dash, 2, 3, 4. I mainly wanted to look at Fiery Temper because there's a deck type that gets overlooked a lot but is still a deck type, and that is the Troublemaker control. You yourself can win the game through Troublemakers. You can play Fiery Temper, and the Troublemaker gets +2 power, which doesn't seem like a lot, but when your opponent has to plan around the fact that it has +2 power, it can really add up. I wouldn't say that this card is as necessary in a lot of Troublemaker decks as they used to be, because removal seems to be a lot more powerful, but in sort of like a long game, the +2 power can be useful, and for 1 action point, it's not that bad. Go Feed is a great card for Troublemaker control decks too, because you put it on a Troublemaker, and if your opponent loses the Troublemaker face-off, then instead of sending a friend home, they dismiss a friend. They discard it. It's gone. It's not going home to come back later. It's toast. Troublemaker control decks do a lot of tricky things to win their Troublemaker face-offs, so this puts even more pressure on your opponent, and that's just great. Sticking to the theme of Troublemaker control, Monstrous Cave is a must-have. You play it to your home, it costs 1, and then you can exhaust this card and pay 1 to search your deck for any Troublemaker, reveal it, put it in your hand, and shuffle your deck. This card is great. This card is unlimited Troublemakers. And since Troublemakers only cost 1 to put in play, this card is a godsend. You play it for 1, you pay 1, and then you pay 1 more to put a Troublemaker in play. That's 3 action points the very first time, and then 1 action point after every time. Not including the cost of putting the Troublemakers in play, but you can fill your hand with the Troublemakers for only 1 action point per. Since you're searching for the Troublemaker, you can choose the exact one you need for the certain situation, and you can make sure that Troublemakers are in play pretty much at all times. Slick Shades isn't something you'll be using a lot, but it's a neat accessory, so if you happen to be pairing blue with white or something, then Slick Shades is something you should look at. It gets +1 power for each Slick Shades in play, so that means if you have 1 in play, it's only 1 power, but if you have 2 in play, it's 4 power, because each of them have the effect. And if you can get all 3 of them in play, then it's actually 9 power. 3 action points, 9 power. That's pretty awesome. The Scariest Clave in Equestria, the one card that you absolutely need if you are doing a Frightened deck when it comes to resources. Play to your home, rallying a Frightened friend costs 1. This card is hurt a lot by the fact that it's unique. If you could run 3 of these and play all 3 of them, that'd be great. But it's still okay at 1. I don't think I would ever run this card at more than 1 in a Frightened deck, but if you happen to pull it off, then it costs 50% more of your opponent's action points, for them to keep playing the game pretty much. Let's say your opponent rallies 3 friends. Normally that's 6 action points, which is already pretty hefty, but if you have a Scariest Clave and Equestria in play, then it actually costs them 9 action points, which that's actually a pretty significant difference. Train Tracks is immediate pressure on your opponent. You play it to your home, and you can exhaust this card and pay 1 to frighten an opponent's friend out of problem, and while this card is exhausted, that card can't be unfrightened, and if you're going to exhaust this every turn to use its effect, then you can just end up frightening your opponent's field, and it's glorious. During the main phase, you exhaust 2 of your characters to dismiss this card, and your opponent can do this too. So pretty much, this is just a stally card. Your opponent is definitely going to exhaust 2 of their characters to dismiss this card as soon as possible, but if your opponent already has a pretty low field, especially if you are out-frightening them, then this card can be really significant. I'd say that this card is just a maybe right now because it costs 3. If this card costed 2, then I'd say this is probably a must-have in most Frightened decks, but I still like running this in at 1 at least when I'm doing Frightened, because it puts that pressure on my opponent and can potentially waste out one of their turns, and stalling for a turn is good for a Frightened deck. Trashed. Anti-meta. Play on a resource, the resource loses and can't have abilities. Takes care of white, takes care of orange, very good card. The cool thing is the resource itself stays in play, so you're not getting rid of it so your opponent can maybe find a way to bring it back and play it again. No, it stays in play, it's just worthless. I think I said this before, but I don't really like the element cards, but some of them are kind of good. So the element of loyalty, you play it to your home, you have to control Rainbow Dash to play this card, and at the start of your turn, you can put a harmony counter on this card. And then every time you either play a friend to a problem or move a friend to a problem, you can remove 1 harmony counter from this to move another one of your characters to that problem. For 2 action points, that is insane. Insane movement you get off of Element of Loyalty. It's 2. Every turn you build 1 up, you're probably going to be playing the game for at least 7, 8-ish turns. You could just get so much off of this. Every turn, it's a free movement, pretty much. Every turn, free movement for the rest of the game. Free movement for the rest of the game, folks. I'm telling you, this card is amazing. The fact that it's play a friend or move a friend, you're going to be doing one of those 2 every single turn, so it is free movement once a turn, every single turn. Must have. 7 power, so if you flip it during face-offs, it's still fine. 2 action points. Put 1 in all of your blue decks. One other thing I want to point out is this card is invaluable if you're playing on even ground, because if you have free movement and your opponent does not have free movement, then you have a huge advantage because you don't be paying for movement when you're playing an uneven ground deck. Finally, last card we'll be looking at is the Kudou map. Again, 7 power on a resource, costs 3. You play it to your home, and when a problem enters play, you may exhaust and retire this card to move up to 6 of your characters at home to that problem. This is pretty much a game-winning card. You play it, and when a new problem enters play, you can just choose to solve that problem immediately and get the bonus points from it. Everything about that is good. And you're moving so many characters over there that if a face-off happens during your opponent's turn or something, then you're going to win that too. It's just really good. Everything about it, it's pretty awesome. I wouldn't say it's necessary like Element of Loyalty is, but keep in mind that there's a card in blue that guarantees that you get the bonus points off of a problem. Like, that's pretty much all you need to know. Oh my god, rarity truly outrageous. You know what, everybody actually just forget that I brought this card up, alright? Like, I don't want to see Cutie Mark rarity truly outrageous decks running around. And that's it for my look at blue. Overall, of all the colors, I'd say that blue stayed the purest. Blue has always been, I have a lot of power, and I can put that power wherever I want to, whenever I want to. You're not going to be winning any face-offs because I want to win them all. And while the other colors have gotten enough power to make it so that blue doesn't win every single face-off in the game, blue has enough resources under it to just continue owning the board. You never have to worry about where your characters are when you're playing a blue deck, because you can put them wherever you want to, whenever you want to. I also love that blue is key in 2 other deck types, so you don't have to just run the regular blue aggro. You also have access to blue Troublemaker Control if you decide that you don't want to run aggro and you want to control instead, and you have access to Frighten Control, which is probably one of my favorite control options in the game. Like, say what you want to about pink control and white-purple movement control. The thing that's probably the coolest about blue's versions of control is they're very aggressive forms of control. You are controlling the board, yes, but your form of control isn't so much controlling what your opponent is allowed to do and not do. Your form of control, at least when it comes to Frighten, is making it very, very difficult for your opponent to play the game. And there's a difference between those two. You make it difficult for your opponent to play, and the whole time your opponent is trying to figure out how to catch up to you, you are just making yourself go farther and farther ahead of them. If you're being aggressive, pink is probably the best color to splash in because pink takes care of all the things that would normally stop you. I would have to say that other than that, it doesn't really matter too much. Another thing that's really cool about blue is it splashes really well, like with pretty much anything. So when it comes to putting things in your blue deck, I'd say that pink is probably your best go-to. Yellow if you're being really aggressive or playing on even ground, because if you're playing on even ground, yellow has all the cheap friends that you'll ever need. Purple and white are also okay, again, for the control options. Orange, not so much. Orange doesn't really have anything that benefits blue a whole lot, with the exception of some of the really big guys. Some people are going to put under this video that, oh, Kudou, you have free movement here, and orange has really big dudes. You can use the free movement to move the big dudes. But the thing about orange is it's very, very selfish. And if you're running orange, you have to run a lot of orange to make orange really pop and work. I think it's better to splash blue into orange. If you're playing a blue deck, I don't think splashing orange in is that great, at least not right now. But yeah, I think that's about it for me. Next, we'll be taking a look at pink. I do hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please leave me a like. Those things really do help me out more than you could ever know. If you have any thoughts on the set, if you have anything that you want to say on blue, any corrections you want to make, please leave it in the comments section below. And finally, subscribe to stay up to date on the latest Kudou news. Bye for now, guys.